Indie games are fantastic, aren't they? They can take the big risks that the big games can't. They can experiment and explore the very notion of what a game is, and they can be proud of however they want to present themselves. And it's an empowering and exhilarating thing to experience and be a part of. But what is an indie game exactly? Well, ask 10 people and you'll likely get 10 different answers. Back in the early days of indie games, which you could argue was the late noughties and early 10s, you would probably answer that an indie game is a very small team, maybe a solo dev, which produces a game independent of a huge game studio and is able to self-publish. While that might still be the way today, an indie studio can produce anything as good as a big studio, and a big studio can produce something that looks and feels like an indie game. Some put it down to a "I'll know it when I see it" sort of thing, others say it has to be a small team, some say it's to do with the price, whereas some put it down to the creators having more control over the entirety of the game production pipeline. Me? Well, it's a bit of a weird answer. There are mainly two types of game animation that I tend to keep an eye out for these days. I look out for stylish animation, and I look out for clever animation. And from what I tend to see in my own experience is that the stylish animation I like tends to come from indie games, and clever animation I like seems to come from AAA games. However, more and more I see these two categories cross over into each other's camps, and that's not to say AAAs don't have stylish animation, nor that indies don't have clever animation. There's plenty of clever indie game animation and plenty of stylish AAA animation. We'll come back to the games that have both in a bit. I think it mostly comes down to the fact that massive AAA companies simply have much more resource at their disposal to produce very sophisticated game animation systems that result in clever looking outcomes. Whereas smaller indie studios that don't have that same resource pour their passion into the style of the movement and make it stand out in the absence of expansive resource. Again, that's not to say that animators and AAA studios don't pour the entirety of their soul into their work, nor that indie animators can't be clever with their animation systems. These are just some observations, that indie animators will have to rely more on the style of what they're animating, while big studios can easily afford more clever systems. Now, because the whole definition of what an indie game is has become much looser and vague, there are categories now that fit between indie and AAA, which are beginning to be referred to as AA or II. Such games that have been suggested are the Ori games, which have the scope and feel of being more than an indie game, and Mega Man 11, which doesn't quite have the scope or feeling of a AAA game. Some even suggest that the 2D Mario games, even games like Mario Wonder, are simply AA games purely from their appearance, scope and length. Same goes for things like Sonic Superstars and Metroid Dread. This, I think, is where the whole notion of what an indie game is has become a little more vague and muddled, but I think this is great. Because, you see, it feels like we're in this second wave or second generation of indie game development. You have studios who now consist of ex-AAA animators and developers, independent creators who have proper industry experience. And you also have very experienced indie game developers who have been creating indie games for so long that they have honed their craft to such an extent that the results no longer seem like they were done without the financial backing of a big studio. Additionally, you do have large independent studios who are more than 10 people, say, but not into the hundreds. The rise of indie games, then, has given us this AA mid-budget result. I want to look at some of these games and celebrate all the efforts of indie developers who have made the most out of the animation in their games, and inspired us all to make stuff that people will have fun playing, and how this has given rise to some AA games. I've got two examples I want to start off with. These two games are quite similar. They both released this year and are both hand-drawn, semi-top-down narrative-driven games. One is from the US and one is from Yorkshire here in the UK. They are #Blood and Thank Goodness You're Here. Their influences are both quite clear. Blood has a clear 90s Hanna-Barbera influence, with a particular leaning towards Genndy Tartakovsky and Craig McCracken's highly stylized and occasional off-model appeal. Whereas Thank Goodness You're Here has taken a more modern approach, with vibes similar to modern US cartoons but with a very distinctive British flavour. Both of these games were created by two people as well. The amount of drawings that were done in Adobe Flash for Blood were in the thousands, which gives the characters and overall motion a very fluid feel. I would call this game a tribute to 90s era Cartoon Network cartoons in the way Cuphead is to the 20s Rubber Hose era. Thank Goodness You're Here takes a simpler approach, but just by looking at the credits, you can see lots of care was taken for the animation by how many animators worked on it. Blood has classic 8-direction movement, which has 5 different animations for each angle of an action, as 3 can be mirrored. Thank Goodness has 4 directions. You have one for going straight up, one for moving sort of sideways, and one for moving straight down, which is angled a little more down. The actual direction angles that these sprites trigger is kind of weird, but I like it. It's quirky and fits the game very well. I just recommend playing both these games. Blood because of how fluid and fun it is, and thank goodness because it's the most British game you'll be playing in a while. I mean, you have to punch everything to interact with it, including speaking to people. It's daft and beautiful. Blood has wonderful animations where you chat to other characters, and there's a pattern of character animation easing really smoothly between a few poses that gives the game a consistent style. Thank goodness has things be a little simpler, like characters moving in a more limited motion, but this means that they can fit a lot more unique context-specific animations depending on the scenario you're currently in. Both these games use exaggerated poses and motion to great effect as well. Becky from Blood can morph into exaggerated poses which go really off-model and appear in a smaller or bigger form, but again it still has a consistent look. Thank goodness also does this, with the main character appearing in varying forms, and other characters contorting and shifting in ways that have this sort of sinister British appeal, like something you might expect to see in Don't Hug Me I'm Scared. Both are actually quite clever in their own elegant ways, such as parts of the character being broken down in ways that save on resource. For instance, I'm pretty sure our little sales rep here, and thank goodness you're here, his face is on a separate layer to the body, which means his little expressions can change throughout all the different animations he does. And Becky from Blood has a clever little animation play if she's putting away an item while running, which means the arm will be on a separate layer and just plays at the same rate as the other animations. Both indie games, but both with an animated appeal that is breaking them free from looking like it's low budget or low resource. Oh, and you can smack everything in both games as well, with varying results. A lot of people I've spoken to point to these as examples of AA games. If we look at Hollow Knight, the animation itself is actually pretty simple. Swinging your nail is just this slight movement, but it does a lot with a little. The effects animations do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of style. New Frame Plus did a great video on this, I'd recommend giving it a watch for a deeper look. I've also made a video looking at the simplicity but the effectiveness of the character animation. But these games simply ooze style due to the massive dedication to the backgrounds and world design, which really elevates the status of these games into something truly special. Ori, on the other hand, has rather extravagant animation, and it's pretty clever. Ori is a 3D model that has been lit and set up so it looks flat, giving it a 2D effect. This aesthetic was inspired by Studio Ghibli films, which is why the backgrounds and all the characters look utterly gorgeous. While Ori is a 3D model, the animations are ultimately exported as 2D sprites, meaning they're not actually 3D models in the game, so all the animations are actually linear and happen one after another. I don't think there's any animation blending or multiple actions happening at once, though there is an in-game squash and stretch happening to the sprite to help blend motions together. Like Hollow Knight, the effects on top really elevate this game up to something that has much classier appeal. And like the Hollow Knight games, the very strong concept and resulting art and world design just make these games some of the most beautiful ones there are. This GDC video goes into great detail about Ori's animation process. Go check it out. Nomad Studios, who previously made the absolutely sublime Grease, are also releasing a new game soon called Never? And Squidshock Studios have released the latest greatest Metroidvania, Bow Path of the Teal Lotus. Actually, we'll come back to Metroidvanias in a bit. But I just want to point at these two hand-drawn games and how they use lower frame rates at points to give this a very animated look, and I really love it. The difficulty with having a fully 2D hand-drawn game is that you can't always afford blending animations, so most actions will have to happen in a linear fashion, meaning one action will have to interrupt another if you want your game to feel good. Bow looks as though it's all hand-drawn, but potentially with segmented character sprites, so you can sort of have separate things going on at once, which is always helpful for more fluid gameplay. Okay, this one I've been keeping an eye on for years, and it is still in development, but it's taking ages because it is literally one dude animating it all. This is one of those games that still fits what many people still think of as an indie game, just one developer tackling it all. The animation in this game is constantly moving and undulating and flowing. When this game moves, it's going to look as smooth as butter on velvet, which is such a weird image. Again though, because the animations are all hand-drawn for the whole character, I imagine it'll be a case of animations interrupting each other for the game to feel good. But if it does feel good, then boy is this game going to be one of the best looking out there. I did a video covering Penny's animation, which you can check out here. But this is another game which I would rank as a AA game rather than an indie game. This is one of those games where the animation is both stylish and clever. Penny's character model is split in an effective way so that multiple animations can play at once and transitions between states is smooth, but also the animations themselves are very expressive, such as Penny's jump here, which I maintain is the best jumping animation in all of gaming. This game will likely have been released by the time I upload this video, but The Plucky Squire was made by All Possible Futures, a game studio started by two ex-industry professionals who had worked on games like Pokemon and Swords of Ditto. This is an absolutely fantastic looking game that utilises both 2D and 3D really well. The way the personality of the character's motion has been kept within both styles is awesome. I'm really looking forward to playing this, and again, this feels much more than what we tend to think of as an indie game, so I'm willing to call this a AA game, given the dev's experience of the industry. I couldn't talk about indie game animation without talking about Cuphead. Studio HDMR is run by two brothers, but they brought on a host of animators to help work on the project to give it that high quality appearance. This is an example of stylish and clever animation, because in order for these animations to look fluid, all sorts of tricks have to be employed so you don't notice any breaks in the animation, because, like I've said, anything fully 2D will have to play in order, unless it's broken up. Cuphead is a bit different because your actual character's animation is fairly straightforward, with actions happening immediately to button presses. However, bosses are different. They are where all the frames of animation have gone. In order for them to look completely fluid, when a certain damage threshold has been hit, the boss lines up its next phase and gets all the frames ready to play so that you don't notice when the next phase has been initiated, and you can only do this on things that don't require an immediate feedback. Some bosses, like this one in the DLC, have multiple layers of animation playing on top of each other, so you can get this effect of many things happening at once. Doing this as one sprite with one whole drawing would probably be impossible, or very inhuman to pull off. I just want to quickly come back to the whole Metroidvania thing just for a sec, because it seems like every other week there's a new masterpiece that's been released. I just want to show you these next three so you can see what's out there and how good it all looks. Beautiful, utterly beautiful. I mean, the results of what is happening these days with indie game animation, I mean, it just keeps getting better and better, and I don't know when this is going to stop it getting better. It's amazing. I'm a little bit, this has kind of gone off script a little bit and rambly, but seriously, you know, what indie devs and small studios are producing right now is just beyond incredible. You know, we are producing stuff that just looks absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to, you know, be making my own game and releasing it one day, you know, because I would like to think I can put what I've learned into practice and make something with this knowledge that I've been gaining, you know? There are lots of other games coming up that are sometimes listed as Metroidvanias, sometimes just as adventure platformers or action platformers, but either way, they all look great, especially this one, which uses stitched art for the sprites. How amazing is that? I'm going to put a list of games in the description for you to check out and just sort of follow, because, you know, I think the more people can see these games and the more people these games are put in front of, the better they'll do, and we'll all benefit from it. Ultimately, I sometimes worry that I make such a fuss over games with clever or stylized animation that some indie devs will think their animations aren't good enough for their game. I've only had one direct example of this firsthand, where a dev remarked to me that their animations weren't great or anything in their game when talking about it, and they totally were. I felt bad because it seemed to them that me only think a game can look good if the animation is top-notch or whatever. I think in the end, your animations have to be functional first and stylish second. Not everyone is going to do the same thing. Your game is your game, and whether you're going for simple, stylish or smart, it's going to look great, but it needs to feel great. Don't for a second think that because there are places out there, like this channel, that praise good animation in games and criticise bad animation, that you should be ashamed or hesitant to just make something. Animation is just art at the end of the day, and no one is the gatekeeper on art. Just make stuff, and don't do it for anyone else. Do it for you. If you love it, others will love it. And that's my current take on indie game animation. Keep up the good work, everyone. Also, please can someone else do more videos and channels on game animation? I'd love to see other takes on this topic. Come back next time and I'll look at Sonic Advance and Mega Man X. Love you, bye.